Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Adam Flickinger. I'm the planning director for Friends of the Chicago River. And I'm just gonna, before we jump into talking specifically about this project and the tool, I wanted to just kind of set the stage with a little bit of the context and where this project came from, which was from an initiative we started in 2020 called the Chicago-Calumet River Watershed Council. So I think Taj is gonna share our screen with some slides. And you can move right on to the next slide. Thank you. So the Watershed Council is a partnership of 18 organizations that have come together to explore the implementation and ideas around broader watershed scale thinking for green infrastructure. So serving right now on what we're calling the steering committee for this collaboration is park districts, land trusts, municipal representatives, stormwater management agencies, all those types of groups that represent land and water issues together that watershed type thinking requires. And Friends of the Chicago River is right now serving as the administrator for this initiative as we build it up and set the structure for the collaboration. Next slide. So early on in the early days, we held a series of workshops to kind of hear from the partners and establish what the focus would be for this work and where the opportunities and some of the barriers were. And through those discussions, we heard a lot about the need for greater collaboration across jurisdictional boundaries, thinking about finding efficiencies from working together on watershed scale issues across the region, recognizing that there's a lot of local, really great local levels, local type work. Doing this, we wanted to think more broadly and connect across those areas. Next slide. So the outcomes of that initial process, we set a vision, a collective vision, a set of goals and tasks that we wanted to take on. The focus really is along the lines of collaborating, like I said, across jurisdictional boundaries, thinking broadly from a regional watershed scale, and then looking at the different missions of the various organizations, linking those together and thinking about multi-benefit green infrastructure projects. Next slide. And so, the focus also is on what we call nature-based solutions. And you might be thinking, what is specifically our nature-based solutions, or some people call them natural solutions or natural climate solutions. But these are strategies for stormwater that capture, filter, and collect stormwater where it lands using the power of plants, trees, soils, and vegetation. Next slide. And the reason that this is the focus for the council is because at the same time as achieving those stormwater goals, it has all different types of ancillary benefits, whether they be public health or air quality or protecting biodiversity or recreational benefits that we think are really important to include in this work. Next slide. And so now that we've established kind of the foundation of the council and what we want to work on and the goals and the vision, we've laid out a series of initial projects to get us started testing those concepts in the real world. One is the project that we're going to hear about today, the Natural Solutions Tool, which was identified through the conversations as something we needed as a resource to help us figure out how can we target and be strategic about investing in projects that satisfy multiple benefits. And then at the same time, we're also doing research about, models, regulatory models across the country and figuring out ways that agencies can work together on climate solutions and green infrastructure. And then we're also, if you go to the next slide, we're also taking on some physical restoration work, getting our hands dirty, doing a project in collaboration with the Chicago Park District on a marsh site called Indian Ridge Marsh South, which is just southeast of Big Marsh, which you may have heard of. But this is a project where we can test some of these ideas on an on-the-ground project. It includes public access improvements, landscape restoration to absorb additional stormwater, as well as improve biodiversity and all the things that we've been talking about. So we're really excited by all this work and these projects, and in particular, this partnership with the Trust for Public Land on the Natural Solutions tool that we're talking about today. So I'm going to turn it back to Carolyn, who's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Adam. So the Trust for Public Land is, I think most of you know, but we are a national organization with over 30 offices around the country. And our mission nationwide is to create parks and protect land for people, ensuring healthy, livable communities for generations to come. And that really aligns us very closely with the project that we're working on here with the Friends of the Chicago River and the Watershed Council. Next slide, please. The Trust for Public Land really works with community at the center and makes sure that we're promoting health, climate, and equity across all of the various projects that we work on. And we really focus on the expertise of local leaders and let them really inform our work. That's really important to the way we do our work. Next slide. I think there's a picture here is of the 606, and I think that in Chicago, a lot of people, when they hear about the Trust for Public Land, the first thing they think about is that project, which we worked on. But really, there are so many things and tools that the Trust for Public Land as a national organization has at its disposal that, that we're really bringing to bear on the projects that we're working on. So a couple of them that we have that you might not be aware of is that we have a very robust advocacy operation where we're actively lobbying legislators in Washington, D.C. to advance the goals of our organization as well as those that are aligned with yours. So we were really had a big voice in helping to create some of the legislation that we see coming out of DC now that support park and open space implementation. We also have a conservation finance operation where we work really hard to have ballot measures passed that will help to support the local creation of parks and open space. And right now we are working on a ballot measure in Cook County that would help to expand and restore the holdings of the Forest Preserve District. So if you want more information about that, I'm happy to share that. But then we also have a very large data and insight operation that really is able to get down to the nitty-gritty and analyze where parks are needed most, where green infrastructure is needed most. And that's the tool that we're bringing to bear here today as we're working on creating this natural solutions tool. So I think that's my last slide, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Taj.
All right, thanks, Carolyn. And thank you everyone for joining today on a Friday. I know I've said this before in some of my other meetings, but it seems like a particularly busy January and February this year. So the fact that you all took time out to learn more about this project and provide feedback, we have some questions for you, opportunity for you all to provide feedback to us, really appreciate it. So as Colin mentioned, my name is Todd Shotland. I'm the Associate Director of the Trust for Public Land's National Climate Program. Among many different things that I do, I oversee our Climate Smart Cities program, where we've worked with 15 major metro regions, develop partnerships, and then associated decision support tools, mapping tools that help pinpoint where investments in parks and green infrastructure and conservation and restoration, all of those nature-based natural climate solutions, where they can provide the greatest benefits. So I'm just going to take maybe 5 minutes, run through a couple quick slides, and then we'll actually demo one of these tools that's similar to what we're building in Chicago. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. So what is the tool that we're developing? And I'll go into more of the functionality during the live demo, but you can see up here the modeling boundaries. This is beyond just the city of Chicago, for the broader Chicago-Calumet River Watershed. And it's going to bring all of these different ways to access this data to be able to hone in on priority locations at the regional, city, neighborhood, and even at the parcel level, where these investments are most needed and can provide the greatest benefits. The modeling objectives in the tool, we're still sort of finalizing what they'll be called, but they're generally going to boil down into these buckets around equitable investments, healthy communities, so public and community health, where to prioritize for cooling urban heat islands, connecting neighborhoods through active transportation projects, naturally absorbing stormwater through green infrastructure, protecting against flooding, and expanding biodiversity. And the sort of a three-part process to developing this tool started with a discovery process where we're meeting with lots and lots of different stakeholders, city agencies, NGOs, community partners, to really understand what is already being done, where can we leverage the great existing work that's already been done, where can we fill gaps and needs through the development of this decision support tool, and how we can sort of prioritize it up front, how folks might be able to use this decision support tool so we can really customize it to those end uses that we identify up front. Then we move into actually building the decision support tool with support from a technical advisory team of local stakeholders and experts. And then the last part, but certainly not the least part, is actually integrating the tool into decision-making processes. There's a lot of tools that exist out there, and not a lot of tools actually get used. And so over the years, we've been building these types of tools for over 10 years. We've started to develop this process and that we follow in each municipality to really helps make sure that after the tool is built, it has staying power and is actually used to guide capital investments going forward. So I mentioned we've developed similar decision support tools in 15 geographies around the country. You can see a map here. We have city partnerships, regional partnerships, and then we've also supported some sort of special projects doing just sort of some limited GIS modeling without developing a full decision support tool. But the power of having 15 major metro regions having similar decision support tools, granted, each decision support tool is customized to each geography, but the sort of functionality and the skeleton of the tool is the same in each geography, that Los Angeles can learn from New Orleans, which can learn from Boston, which can learn from Chicago, and vice versa. And so we can share lessons learned, share how folks are using these decision support tools to guide projects, to guide investments across a range of different policies, implementation, community engagement, grant sort of deciding where to fund work, as well as folks that are applying for funds to be able to justify their work. So lots of different use cases. And you can see here, yeah, so it's everything from supporting coalitions, like up in Boston, it's the Metro Mayor's Climate Preparedness Task Force, to policy and planning. LA used it in their resilience plan, to actual guiding project development in many different geographies. So that's a whirlwind overview of the sort of the process, what we're creating, how we're creating it, the end product. And so now we'll take about 10, 15 minutes, maybe 15 minutes or so, to do a live demo of a similar decision support tool that we developed for a different geography. And I'll pause. Just any big picture questions. I'm going to go into details on the decision support tool, how it works and all that sort of stuff, but any sort of overarching questions about the Watershed Council, Trust for Public Land before we dive into the demo? All right. And Carolyn and Adam, if you guys can keep an eye on the chat, I don't have the chat open. So folks, feel free to put questions into the chat, and we'll get to them after the live demo. So I'm going to show one of the tools that we developed for Camden, New Jersey, called Green and Healthy Camden. And all of the tools that we develop have a public-facing landing page that anyone can go in and access. You can access the actual mapping portal. You can learn about all of the different data that went into the tool. Oftentimes there's dozens, if not hundreds, of different data sets and data points that go into these tools. So you can learn, you can click there, and it'll pull up a description of all of the different data that went in here, if the data was manipulated, where we pulled it from, the methodology, what it's called, and there are different tabs for the different types of data that are included. There's also a user guide. There are downloadable PDF maps. So if you don't want to use the decision support tool to go in and create your own analysis, but you want to know where are the priorities, let's say, for addressing urban heat islands, you can click on a pre-made PDF map that will show, and it will take just a second to load, where are the priority, the moderate, high, and very high priority locations for addressing extreme heat in a given city, along with a description of how we arrived at those priority locations. So let me go back to the tool itself. There are also ways to report data issues. Inevitably, when you create these types of decision support tools, you run into issues. Either new data becomes available, functionality there can be bugs in the tool. So there's an ability for folks to go in and report issues. And then in Camden, we also provide a link to the Camden Parks and Open Space Plan, which we developed using the decision support tool in part, along with all the traditional community engagement that you would normally do. We then went in and ran analyses using the decision support tool to figure out where investments in parks and open space were most needed based on the climate, health, and equity indicators for the city. You can also learn more about the challenges, the partnerships, but I'm gonna skip all of that and go into the mapping portal itself, which is the fun part. All of our decision support tools are publicly available but password protected. So anyone can go in and create a free user account and access the decision support tool. And this is just for data licensing and also to be able to track how many folks are using it, how frequently, really be able to demonstrate the usage of the decision support tool. So I already have an account, so I'm gonna log in. And what you'll see here on the right is the project geography for the city of Camden. And this operates just like Google Maps or any other mapping tool that you may be familiar with, where you can zoom in, zoom out, you can change different base maps. And on the left are different ways to access all of the data that we processed for this decision support tool. So I'll start with overlay data. So overlay data, and again, for each of these sort of tool widgets, we call them, you can expand them or make them go away just by these little down arrows. So we'll start with overlay data. So we're gonna click on this little overlay folder, and you can see data broken into these different categories. So we could start with absorb, let's say, which is focused on managing stormwater. And so we click on these little subfolders and we can see the reported flooding locations throughout the city. I'm on home internet, so that little spinning wheel means my internet might not be as fast as usual. There we go. So you can see the reported flooding locations throughout the city of Camden. Or if you wanted to look at, all right, really my focus, you might want to look at how do we reduce combined sewer overflows. So these harmful pollution events where a mixture of sewage, and stormwater go into the water. And so here you could click on this link and you can see where are the sewer sheds that are contributing the most to the combined, sewer overflows. And you could go and click on any of these and see the data tagged to that sewer shed, for example. I'm not going to click through, there's literally 100+ data layers here, but I'll click on a couple others. So for cool, let's say you're not interested in stormwater, but your focus is on reducing extreme heat. Extreme heat's one of the biggest health hazards that climate change presents. And the way that our cities are designed, some areas are hotter than others. And so you can look at where are the cool parts in the city, for example, versus some of the hot spots. So here the land surface temperature is 75. Let's click on this hot spot. You can see the land surface temperature is 104 degrees. And so that land surface is magnifying those extreme heat waves that are increasing in frequency and severity. And so you can start to hone in on locations where you might want to plant trees, remove impervious surface to cool those neighborhoods. There's also a ton of equity data in this tool. And so we pull both from national equity indicators, so EPA's EJ screen data, where you can go in and you can see across the city of Camden, these are the census block groups. A lot of these census block groups are very high priority locations for addressing equity challenges. And you can see, you can click on any of these census block groups and pull up some of the equity indicators that are tagged to the census block group. In Camden, we also had local data that the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Council had that supplemented those national data layers. And again, you could click on any census block group and pull up equity indicators for that census block group. So I'm not going to click on more of these overlay data. These are raw data sets that we have compiled, bracketed into these different categories, including green infrastructure considerations and more. Where it gets really interesting are the analysis results, where we have local technical advisory team members that help us create what we call these stacked priorities. So if your interest, you don't want to wade through all of these different data sets, but you just want to see where are the moderate, high, and very high priority locations for reducing localized storm flooding. Oh, there we go. You can access this. And so this is multiple data sets that are weighted based on the technical advisory team, and you can hone in on those priority locations throughout the geography. Or you could look at, let's unclick that. Let's look at cooling. So if you're focused on both reducing urban heat islands, increasing tree canopy, reducing impervious cover, what are the overall stacked priorities, moderate, high to very high across the city? Now, if you really want to focus on multi-benefit opportunities, you can look at what are called the overall priorities. So where are the overall priorities to absorb stormwater, cool heat islands, address equity, and protect, which is focused on protecting against flooding. And you get to start to hone in on specific neighborhoods that are priority locations. I'm going to show, hopefully folks aren't completely overwhelmed. I know that if folks don't have a GIS background, this might be a little bit overwhelming, but we have plenty of opportunity. We know that after we build these tools, we're going to need to stay engaged, train people on how to use them, run analyses ourselves. So if you might say, all right, you know, once the tool is built in Chicago, well, I think this tool might be able to answer a question that I have, but I'm not really sure. We stay engaged and can help run analyses for folks. But I'm going to show just a couple other features of the tool. One of my favorite features of the tool is the scenario tool, where you can set your own objectives and use just simple slider bars. So this is one of the simplest ways to access the data in the tool. So let's say you just want to focus on absorbing stormwater. I'm going to drag that up. Let's see. Let me click the scenario layer. Man, my internet's not happy today. Well, let's see if this works. For cooling heat islands, there we go. So let's say your focus is on addressing urban heat islands. I'm going to drag that slider bar to 10. And these are now the moderate, high, and very high priority locations for addressing extreme heat. But we know that extreme heat disproportionately impacts folks that don't have air conditioning, that rely on public transportation and are outside waiting for bus stops, things like that. And so we might want to focus on addressing extreme heat in areas that also have a high equity priority. And so you'll see the map shifts based on these slider bars and based on the objectives that the user sets. Or hopefully this works now. Let's say you want to address extreme heat and stormwater. There we go. The map shifts slightly to show you the priority locations for heat, stormwater, and equity. Now, let's say you've honed in on a project location based on either you've already identified it or using the tool, you've decided, all right, this area is a priority location. And so we're going to zoom in and we're going to turn on the parcel layer. Now, all of these purple polygons pop up and you'll be able to see now that all of this data is tagged to the parcel scale. So let's say we hone in on this imaginary, well, it's not an it's a real place, but it's an imaginary project location because we've identified this using the tool. You can then look through, all right, who owns this? What's the size? Is it a priority for these different categories? What are some of the green infrastructure suitability metrics? And you can scan through and get a cursory understanding of the equity metrics, the flooding metrics. And then let's say you decide, all right, yes, this is an area that we want to investigate. This is a parcel where we're considering a real project. You can create a parcel profile report. And judging by my internet speed, I'm guessing it's going to take 30 seconds to create this profile report. But what you'll see, and you can do this for any parcel or right-of-way, so any road, you can create a report that will summarize all of the climate, all of the equity, all of the equity metrics, so that you can then use it in public outreach, public meetings, grant reports, and the like. And yeah, it's taken a minute. You can see that it's processing. It's processing a lot of data. I'll give it another 10 seconds, and if it doesn't load, we'll move on. Oh, there we go. So these reports provide a summary for the parcel, basics on, is it a stormwater, is it a cool priority, is it a protect priority, and then there's one page for each objective. So here for stormwater, summarizing all of the necessary stormwater information that you might want to consider if you're thinking about a project there. You can see both parcel information as well as how it compares to the neighborhood and the broader sewer shed, along with green infrastructure considerations. And you can see this is I think it's about a 6 or 7 page PDF with all of this incredible data that you can then go and use in grant reports, like I mentioned, for public outreach, and really make the case for why you're focusing on this specific location. So let me go back to the tool. I'm just going to share a couple other features before we open it up. So let me turn off the scenario layer, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So I mentioned, because all of the data is tagged to the parcel scale, you can query parcels that meet your specific criteria. So let's say you're focused, you're an organization, you want to green vacant lots and provide co-benefits in those greening, in those projects. So you can use the tool to query, let's say, let's look for vacant parcels, vacant, I'm going to add that condition, yes, that are a stormwater priority, yes, are a cool priority, yes. And I know I'm moving really quickly here, and there's lots of different options that you can pull from the drop down, but I'm just going to keep going so we have plenty of time for questions. And our equity. And again, you could hone in on specific equity metric, or you could do the overall stacked equity priorities, add condition. And then you could run that query, and it will pull up all of the parcels in this geography. And they're a little bit hard to see because I have the purple layer on. There, now they'll pop out a little bit more. So there are 998 vacant parcels in Camden that are a priority for stormwater, cooling, and equity. So let's say you want to hone in, all right, that's not particularly helpful for deciding where to work. Let's say you want to focus on those larger vacant parcels. So you could go in and change it and say, only show me the parcels that are greater than an acre, where you could really do, let's say, a community garden, tree planting, a whole bunch of different opportunities. So I added that to the query, and I'm going to run the query again, and it's going to bring up now 14 vacant parcels that are of a size where you could do a pretty significant green infrastructure project. The very last thing I'm going to show, I know I said that was the last functionality I was going to show, but this will truly be the last functionality I'll show, is the 10-minute walk impact report. So let's say you've honed in on a project location. Let's see this vacant parcel here. And you are going to do an urban garden or a reforestation, or you're going to put in a small park, and you want to see who's going to be served by this project. You go to the 10-minute walk report, and you can draw a polygon. And this is going to be a pretty crude polygon. And there we go. And I'm going to call it Test Urban Garden. Save that. And then I'm going to put in where you can actually get to this, this project. So let's say this might be a freeway, and you're not going to be able to access it over here, but you are going to be able to access it over here. Oh, uh-oh. Let me escape. All right, well, we'll leave it at that, but you can tap to run the analysis, and you'll click OK, and it will generate all of the demographics of the folks that live within a 10-minute walk of this project location. And again, this is probably going to take a minute, but it'll show you population, age, income, and race of those that live within a 10-minute walk. And you can either view it here, or you can create a PDF report that will that you could then copy and put into a grant application, or use in a PowerPoint, things like that. And it's both the numeric values along with graphs that show the value.